introduction, the Brown Act requires that all Board of Supervisor meetings be open and public. And also the role of the county clerk is to record all proceedings of the Board of Supervisors. So the board has to keep a record of its decisions and its proceedings of all regular and special meetings. So, you know, if Lisa and Don are out having lunch and decide that they're going to give a whole bunch of money to, you know, a new contract, that wouldn't be official for them to be talking about it there in any capacity. That would be a violation of the Brown Act. They would have to bring it and talk about it during the meeting. So similar to a city council, Board of Supervisors has executive, legislative, and quasi-judicial powers. The important difference is that the county is an administrative division of a state, whereas the city is a municipal corporation, and thus counties implement as necessary, and they refine local application of state law and public policy, where cities mostly produce and implement their own local laws and public policy. And they're often concerned with the provision of courts, jails, and public health and lands. We go to the next slide. Oh, sorry, somebody is mentioning who is to point out who. So Andrew Doe is over on the top left. Just below him is Doug Chafee, and I'm just going counterclockwise. That is Lisa Bartlett, and then up at the top is Don Wagner. Next slide, please. So who is your supervisor? Depending on where you live, you're going to have a different supervisor. And if you're not sure, we can provide you with a link to show you, I think it's at the very end of this slide deck, where you could find it out. It's also on their Board of Supervisors website. So right now, it looks like, yeah, second district, I'm sorry, is it District 1 that's open? Yes.
District 2 is open.
District 2 is vacant.
Okay. Yeah, and I think Doe is District 1, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so he is the chairman currently of the Board of Supervisors. Doug Chafee is the vice chairman, and he is in the 4th district. Lisa Bartlett's in the 5th. Don Wagner's in the 3rd. Next slide, please. And so again, the authorities of the Board of Supervisors are executive, legislative, and quasi-judicial. And we're just going to touch briefly on each of these and how you know, how we have been impacted from our perspective and our work, and that we've done on a grassroots level with how the board, you know, operates through their authorities. Next slide, please.
Thank you.
So for the executive role that they serve, they set priorities for the county and they establish policy. They make appointments on boards, committees, and commission. They oversee most county departments and programs and annually approve their budgets. They also appropriate and spend money, so that's controlling the county budget. They supervise the official conduct of county officers and employees, although it is limited on behalf of sheriff and the district attorney. They do control all county property, and they conduct public hearings on land use. And so the board's legislative and executive activities are conducted at public meetings, right, with certain personnel and legal matters discussed in closed session. So you'll often see that when you go to a Board of Supervisors meeting, or you're watching one on, you know, when you look at the agenda, if they have a closed item session, it's usually something regarding to, you know, a personal or legal matter that's discussed by the board. Next slide, please. So in talking about, you know, how they establish policies, what's been probably the biggest impact on all of us in Orange County in this last year, the COVID-19 pandemic. Unfortunately, our Board of Supervisors has not done a great job with how they have used their, you know, they haven't established great policies to help everybody in the county. And I don't know if many of you remember, but at the beginning of COVID, there were daily COVID briefings that were available either on TV or via web. The the county of Los Angeles still does those. And we just stopped doing it. Like right at the height of the pandemic, I think in July was when they stopped. And it was right after Michelle Steele made a big announcement that COVID's on the way out, we're gonna open back up, everything's gonna be great. And, you know, from the very beginning, there has definitely been, they have not really acknowledged the severity of the virus and its disproportionate impacts on vulnerable and low socioeconomic communities. We know that the biggest impacts have been on the city of Santa Ana and also Anaheim. And there's just disproportionate impacts. And those are the areas where we do have many of the most vulnerable in our communities. Part of the reason that happened was because the Board of Supervisors didn't have, we didn't have access to testing availability right away. I remember just thinking, there were so many options for people that I knew in LA. I went to UCLA and I lived in LA for about 20 years, and everybody could just go to Dodger Stadium or do something very easily. And it was like, you had to really do some research, and it just became a really difficult thing that the people that are supposed to represent us and give us information regarding healthcare, and especially in the middle of pandemic, I never received any updates. I would get more information trying to do all the research that I needed to get, to try and find a place where I could, do testing. I believe testing didn't even really roll out on a bigger level sometime until about, mid to end of summer. And then also contact tracing. There was lack of disclosure of hospitalization data, information regarding outbreaks in school, businesses, long-term care facilities. These are all still, I think, problems that we're having. And we're almost a year into this. For comparison, the County of Los Angeles, their Board of Supervisors, not only do they have public hearings every day regarding COVID, they invite the press, they take questions, they engage. I think the amount of transparency and information that they're providing to their community is far greater than what we've been provided in Orange County. As far as any information, I think even with the vaccine that's just started rolling out, we received more information because they hired a PR agency. They spent $2 million on a PR agency to basically just tell you where you could go get a vaccine. And so, it's just unfortunate that because of all of these things, there have been so many tragedies within the county that could have been prevented, starting from the lack of access to testing. We had a health officer, Nicole Quick, she instituted the mask mandate for the county of Orange after our governor had given one for the entire state. And she went to the Board of Supervisors. She let them know this was what they were doing. There were people that read her personal information. They gave her address where she lived, and then protesters started showing up outside of her house, forcing her to have to resign. She was getting death threats for trying to help people for a mask mandate. To this day, the Board of Supervisors doesn't enforce masks at the Board of Supervisors meetings. You can go, I don't recommend it. I've gone up to a point where I just knew things were not safe. Being in that building, there's a huge group of folks that show up every meeting, every 2 weeks to give public comment specifically about how they think COVID is a lie. They don't, masks don't work. All of these things that we know aren't following science. Folks are just, they want to open up the county, not that we all don't either, but I think we want to be alive to make sure that businesses and schools and everything else flourish. So, it is important that we have a county that really took COVID seriously. And, we're a year into it now looking back, and we can point to all these problems. And it was because they didn't establish good policy. They criticized the health officials that were in place to give, all of these different directives. And it's just been an unfortunate circumstance and list of events. I'm sure we all have lived experience through all of this. So they did reappoint a new health officer resignation, who I think most of you may know. His name is Dr. Clayton Chow, and he has become a fixture at Board of Supervisors meetings. He does come and give information. Sometimes it feels a little like it's kind of led, so sometimes it feels like Andrew Doe is leading him in what he should be saying. I think he doesn't feel super confident in what he's relaying to folks. Sometimes he gets emotional because obviously, I think he has been impacted personally, which is awful. but at least I know that there's like a human connection to that, because when you sometimes discuss things or you hear the Board of Supervisors discussing things about COVID, I don't feel a human level of empathy there necessarily, me myself personally. And, you know, that, I guess we can go to the next slide from here. I think I've said quite enough about COVID. So again, just sort of in talking about, you know, some of the issues as far as the discretionary budget, you know, there have been things that have come up already over this last, I think, month or two, that there have been media reports that the county hasn't been transparent with the way that they have been issuing contracts, private contracts for different things. So these statistics don't even account for fiscal year 2021. But they do set the priority, and they control the almost $1 billion discretionary budget. And as you can see, it's increased considerably over the last, you know, almost 5 years here. We can go to the next slide. And so where does that discretionary revenue come from? It comes from your tax dollars. And the discretionary funds are here listed. So the majority of them do come from your property taxes, but there's also a bunch of other taxes and revenues that everything comes from as well. And we can go to the next slide. So this is where I'm going to give just a little bit of a breakdown of the priorities that the supervisors set as far as how they spend their money. And for this again, this is for the discretionary funds. So, you know, they've doubled almost the amount of Sheriff's Department that what the Sheriff's Department has received. We've been told, you know, again, our advocacy work in this is the only thing that we can look at is what the county has available to us. And unfortunately, they don't make their reports very readily available. And if you do see a report, it often requires a really immense sort of scope of, you know, dissection to understand where all of this money is going. They do break things down. You know, the Sheriff's Department, they call that social control, which includes Sheriff's Department, law enforcement, jails, the DA. And they have gone up, as you can see here, 98% since 2008 and 2009. And these are statistics that are, you know, a little bit older, but they're still very relevant because these numbers continue to rise. And the only number that maybe has gone up a little bit is the healthcare agency, but that's only because of the CARES Act, and they were given more money. And the social services agencies, it still declines. They may have gotten a little bit of a bump, but it's really insignificant compared to how the Sheriff's Department is still receiving money. You may have also seen I was mentioning the private contracts that, sorry, the secret contracts that they didn't disclose, but they have, there was a mid-year budget report that was released, I think 2 meetings ago. And in their report, they basically stated that they have spent more money on sheriff salaries. So it's, you know, it's salary increases, promotions, things like that. We are an incredibly rich county, and so much of our money goes to law enforcement. We'll talk about the salaries as well, that some of the our officials are paid. They're exorbitant. They get paid a lot of money to do work. And not to say that they're not doing important work, but it is, you know, I think when comparing with the rest of the state of California, even with the rest of the United States, it's gonna blow your mind. It's quite astonishing. And let's see, we can go to the next slide. So let me tell you a little bit about how the budget works and if the budget reflects your priorities. We can go to the next slide. Actually, one more. No, go back, sorry about that. I'm just gonna give a little brief overview. I'll get into the budget we have a couple more slides further down the line. So the Board of Supervisors makes a decision on how to spend our tax dollars, right? They control an almost $1 billion discretionary budget. It's sometimes called net county costs, or NCC, that they set the priorities for. And because the supervisors work for us, they really should develop a budget that reflects our priorities. Unfortunately, they are not very big advocates. In fact, they're not advocates whatsoever of public participation in budgeting. Even it's supposed to be public. It's difficult to figure out how we as residents of Orange County can influence the supervisor's decisions. To be effective advocates, we need to understand how the budget process works and the windows of opportunity for advocacy. Really, as far as people's budget and our work that we do it based off of, when they list that they're going to have their budget hearings. So in 2020, the process was a little bit different because of the pandemic. And, I'll go ahead and lay out some of the usual processes to show the difference, which may be potentially carrying into this year, depending on how the pandemic keeps rolling out. We're really not sure. But, obviously knowledge is power. We want to understand the budget cycle. So from December to January, we should be reaching out to county departments. The county manager, this is their cycle, how they do it. December to January, they prepare the budget instructions for the county departments with input from the Board of Supervisors on their budget objectives. And then February to April, they start developing the recommended budget. So currently, that's what they're doing. They're developing new budget requests, they're reviewing budget requests, they're convening budget workshops in order to clarify, what the Board of Supervisors is setting the priorities for and what the county manager develops the recommended budget. We have no say in that. And in fact, because of what happened over the last year, the pandemic, Andrew Doe has gotten really upset a couple of times at a public comment that I've made, calling out some of the information that I've read. And it's been from access to public records requests that were requested by the Voice of OC. And, they're a nonpartisan organization. I think all they want to do is have transparency and have accountability with where our money is being spent. We are a very rich county, and we received so much more extra, federal CARES Act money that could have been used in much better ways. And we have to be critical of those things. It's part of our job. It's your money that we're giving to them in a lot of ways, So during a normal year, again, in May and June is when the Board of Supervisors makes the recommended budget available for public view on its website. And we'll give you some links to that as well, so you can take a look at it. If you're a numbers person, you may be fascinated by it. If not, you'll probably be bored to death. But the county also does announce a public hearing date. And the public hearing date usually happens about a month after the release of the recommended budget. The budget hearings are usually in June, the last 1 or 2 days. And this is a chance for advocates to analyze the recommended budget and mount campaigns to demand a budget that aligns with their community and values. The board may revise the recommended budget based on pressure from advocates or other stakeholders. And once the board approves the recommended budget with or without revisions, this isn't a normal year, they would do it by June 30th. This last year, they didn't do it until September. They obviously delayed it because of the pandemic. So the public hearings were released on September 1 and 2. And I will go into some information a little bit further down the line regarding our advocacy work that People's Budget did regarding those public hearings. But we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So the next function, we were talking about is executive. Now we're going to talk about the legislative role. In its legislative duties, the board adopts ordinances, resolutions, and minute orders with the limits prescribed by state law. So this fine gentleman here in this photo, his name is Sergio Perez, and he is the executive director of the Office of Independent Review. I think some folks were talking about oversight and information about who holds them accountable, essentially. There is limited capacity to that, but as far as what the Office of Independent Review does, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of background here. So Sergio Perez is the executive director of the Office of Independent Review, and he was voted in on March of 2020. He's the third county Office of Independent Review executive director. Prior to his appointment, the office had been sitting vacant since 2018. You may or may not be familiar with the Office of Independent Review. We call it OIR, but they serve as a council and an independent resource for the Board of Supervisors, working to ensure transparency and accountability in the operations of the Orange County Sheriff-Coroner Department, the Probation Department, and the Office of the District Attorney, and the Office of the Public Defender, and the Social Services Agency. So they're collectively referred to as, just different county departments, but they serve a lot of different functions for everyone that, you engage with as a resident of Orange County. Let me see here. Sorry, I lost my place. They do, the OIR is authorized by law to provide periodic status updates and reports on its activities to the Board of Supervisors, relevant county departments, and the public. So the OIR has been providing the board with quarterly reports describing its work, along with special reports as it completes its reviews. It does solicit feedback from the board and relevant county and community stakeholders on a continual basis. And so, it's really important that, think of Sergio as having an open door policy in a way. He is there to make sure, independently review the functions of these different departments. So if you see something or know of something that's happening, we've met with him, as a coalition with People's Budget and a few others. And he was great in, talking with us, engaging us. We expressed a lot of different concerns about things. It's not a fast type of action. We don't talk to him and he immediately fixes anything. There's obviously a lot of processes to the way, he has to do his work. And so just real quickly, I'm just going to give you a little bit more feedback, and then I'm going to hand it over to Lulu because I think we're running a little over on time. So the OIR was created in 2008 to monitor OCSD and assist in improving its practices. You might recall, following a series of scandals that shook the public's confidence in the Orange County criminal justice system, the board expanded the OIR's oversight, monitoring, and investigative powers in 2015. The OIR now has jurisdiction over 5 departments, along with access to confidential information, proceedings, and the concrete authority to review both systemic issues and individual incidents. To carry out its work, the OIR empowered to communicate its reviews and findings to the public, the board, the relevant county departments, and does so long as it does not disclose confidential information without necessary authorizations. Since 2015, the OIR has experienced a tumultuous period characterized by unsteady staffing, questions about its utility and independence, and scant public output. However, given its mission and authority, the OIR is well situated to meet renewed local scrutiny on government services that followed recent disclosures of local evidence handling issues of the tragic murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis this summer. Beginning with the appointment of Sergio Perez in May 2020, the OIR is now working steadily to establish a clear and operational philosophy, develop necessary relationships with stakeholders, and coordinate the relevant county departments to carry out his work. So they do a series of promises of what they want to do. They want success and oversight accountability agencies. So their outreach efforts include, meeting with different county unions and county agencies. So despite the pandemic, they've been meeting with various stakeholders over the last quarter. The meetings are aimed at increasing public awareness to the office and its duties. During the last quarter, they met with the county employee unions, they met with county executives and staff, they met with various local community and advocacy groups, and I can attest to that because we were one of them, and also state and federal enforcement agencies. There's also ongoing coordination and cooperation with relevant county departments. So, they do have to cooperate with county department heads in monitoring its work and its participation in a confidential way. So that's why it takes a long time, because, they have to investigate everything. And he's also serving as the county counsel in a way that, the information that he holds is obviously of a confidential nature. And, he definitely is working to establish, I think, routine access to sensitive information in accordance with applicable laws, but sometimes it requires engagement with stakeholders outside of county government. For example, OCPD routinely gathers and makes sense of sensitive confidential information related to juveniles, and state law restricts this information and empowers the presiding judges of the counties juvenile court to determine instances in which protected or related information can be released. So they have, 3 quick bullet points regarding their work plans of what they want to be working on for what their goal, I think, is as far as the, how they run this office. So OCPD and OCSD, the use of force policies, training, and practices. Number 2 is OCSD, Office of the DA, and OPD treatment of evidence relevant to criminal allegations and charges. And number 3 is OCPD, OCDA, OCSD use of psychological evaluations and hiring and fitness for duty reviews. And I think we can go to the next slide, and I will be handing it over to Lulu, I believe. Oh, I can just touch on this very quickly. So again, going back to the budget and the revenue authority, they can raise local revenues by imposing and increasing tax, an assessment, or a fee. So a tax for a charge against an individual or landowner, which pays for public services, an assessment, which is the revenue generated, must be used for specific improvements or services. A fee, which is a charge on an individual, which cannot exceed the reasonable cost of providing services. And it can also put bond measures on the ballot. So I have to say that, the County of LA, you may have heard that they passed Measure J during the 2020 election cycle. And that was money that was being, reallocated from law enforcement to community programs. They had a board of supervisors that they were able to work with, and they were able to put that bond measure on the ballot, and they were successful in passing it. So there definitely is, people are wanting to do this. I know sometimes saying defund the police is like a scary thing, but when you think about how much money they're getting, we're not taking away all their money. We're just reallocating some of the money because we know it can be put to better use. So again, the board can only impose taxes, assessments, and fees with which the legislature or constitution allow the county to impose, and which are approved by either a simple or 2/3 majority of local voters. And we can go to the next slide. And from here, I will hand it over to Lulu.
Thank you so much, Karen, and hi, everyone. Just to finish the last bit of who is the Board of Supervisors and what they do, as Karen was saying, they have 3 powers. They have the executive power, they have the legislative power, but they also have a quasi-judicial role as well, which is basically settling claims outside of the court. And they may examine and audit the accounts of all county officers as they relate to the management and disbursement of funds, which we hope, or we wish they do more of that, but they do have the subpoena power to get their requested, to bring all the requested files to the board, and they can delegate the subpoena power to committee members. And also they have the power to sort of make decisions about land use and tax issues. So that's very briefly the quasi-judicial role. And if you have any questions on that, we can answer it to the extent of our knowledge. But I really want to go, because I think we're short on time, and there are quite a few things that we wanted to talk to you about, in addition to all the important things that Karen said. So can we go for the next, so good governance. So I know that Felicity and Women For promised you that you'll know everything you want to know about the Board of Supervisors, which is not realistic. But they also told you why you should care. And this is the part why that you should care. Can we go to the next slide? So what is good governance? Good governance is basically the conduct of public affairs and management of public resources responsibly. That's a very basic definition. And I'm using the definition from the Council of Europe, to be honest, because surprisingly, this concept here doesn't exist in, I mean, not surprisingly, actually, it makes sense. It doesn't exist within American politics as much as it does in the rest of the world, especially in Europe. So why is it important to have proper conduct or responsible conduct of public affairs and public management of public resources? Because if we don't have that, then we have a situation of poor governance, and poor governance or lack of good governance can be extremely dangerous. And it's not hyperbole to say that, yes, of course, corruption that we all know, and lack of economic development, of course, because we'll be adversely affected, but it can actually lead to civil war. And I don't need to remind everyone that we haven't really even fully exited a 4-year term of very, very poor governance. And we saw how that culminated in an insurrection attempt on January 6th. And again, these little things that happened, some of them are not little, actually, big things that happened during that bad or poor governance, that lacked transparency, that lacked credibility, that, all these things that we're going to talk about in a sec. But also the things that they were allowed to happen, the rise of white supremacy. And although I'm talking about the country, the US in general, that also applies to us here. And I'll explain that as we get along. Next slide, please. So there are principles of good governance, and some have 6 and some have 8. We're supposed to have 12 here, but I'm sorry that I didn't type. I missed one here. So good governance or good government is participatory. And we all know the basic tenet of that, like you have free and fair elections, you have participation, you have representation, right? So if we want to look at our board of supervisors and see what they're doing there, in this aspect, they probably unintentionally or unwillingly, they're doing fantastic, not because they, as persons or as elected officials, are wonderful, just because we actually happen to have a fantastic registrar of voters. I think Woman 4 hosted him during the elections, and we saw how efficient and how effective and how he performed, or he functioned with high integrity. And we were all, I remember, very, very impressed with him at that time, right? So that part, we actually have functioning very well in our county. We had the elections of 2020, which were very, very challenging on so many aspects, right? But we actually were far ahead in advance, etc. We've all been on this call before. But there's also another aspect of participation, which is other than election, to have an open door policy, to have a public venue for the public to be engaged, to ask questions, to raise concerns. This is where our county board of supervisors gets a glaring F. They're really not that good in facilitating public comment. If it were up to them, they'll get rid of us, all of us, but especially Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Just focusing on what happened this summer, we saw that there seems to be like an implicit policy, if you will, to exclude people of color, to exclude Black people. On January 27th, there was a big demonstration at the Board of Supervisors meeting, and some of the Black activists, the very few Black activists we have in OC, went in to give public comments. Some of the supervisors left their seats and went in, didn't even bother to listen to them. The others were fiddling, doing something, to the point that when those activists came back, when those constituents, when those residents came out, they were so upset and so offended that they felt like they didn't listen to them. And that's at the height of the George Floyd demonstrations. So like the lack of, as Karen would say, the lack of human empathy was beyond the pale at that point. Responsiveness, actually, can we, I'll go very quickly over them. So part of it is responsiveness. The third is efficient and being efficient and effective, transparent, following the rule of law, ethical conduct, competence and capacity, innovation and openness, and sound financial management, which we definitely lack, and human rights, cultural diversity and social cohesion, accountability. And I will add the element that I forgot to add here, which is sustainability and long-term orientation for the policies. Can we go to the next one, the next slide? So the participatory is what this is what I talked about. We have the board of the voter registrar of voters and the public meetings of the Board of Supervisors. Next slide, please. Responsive. So here, and I might ask Karen to join me here, just because she was pivotal in this. So the key part here in being responsive to the needs and interests of your constituency, right? But not any needs, legitimate needs. So the needs that we have a very loud minority going to the Board of Supervisors demanding that we don't social distance, we don't use masks, they want to get rid of the vaccine. These are not legitimate demands that as a government following good governance should follow. But for instance, the example that we have is the work that the People's Budget OC has done over the summer, which is basically conducting a survey. We got responses from around 1,000 people or so as an initial response in the midst of a pandemic. I think that was very good. We were very happy with it. And then we analyzed the responses and presented the results to the Board of Supervisors. And it's been crickets since. We've, remember Karen just talked about the cycle of the budget and how it's presented in September. We submitted our report in September. Nothing happened. Before I give it also to Karen, maybe for the next slide to just talk about the budget, if you will, because you wanted to talk about it. Responsiveness is, I remember very well, just before Memorial Day, we had a petition signed by 4,000 people that I personally delivered to the meeting and had it in the record, asking the Board of Supervisors to close the beaches before the summer surge that we had. And again, nothing, not a single response. And that is a big problem in the structure of the Board of Supervisors, is that once we elect those supervisors, we have very limited ways of really forcing them to discuss an issue that we feel so strongly about. We had thousands of people asking them for tests, thousands of people asking them to close the beaches, etc., and that didn't happen. Next slide. So next slide, I think I'll give it over to you, Karen, just to talk about the budget if you want.
Sure. So Lulu did make reference to the People's Budget Survey and report that we, last year sent out to folks. It's still available. We're going to be revamping the survey, but as you can see, the graph over on the right side is 55% social control, the black part. That is currently how the county spends your money. So that social control aspect is law enforcement, DA, jails. And then you can see the community service slice is 17%. Obviously, there's other things, infrastructure, environmental resources. When we conducted our survey, the majority, 77% overwhelming support for community services, which includes public health, rent relief, in a time, especially like COVID. I mean, if you think about it too, I'm just going to very quickly touch back to, the inadequacies regarding the COVID rollout. They did such a good job with the election this year, like ROV. How could they have not? I mean, there was access to languages, there was access to, they gave you PPE if you needed it on the way in. How did they not even think to consider that roadmap for the COVID rollout to a certain degree. As you know, even with the vaccine, the registration app is currently still only available in 2 languages. We're a county of 3 million people, and Spanish only became available, I think, a week ago. So, it's just unfortunate. The lack of participation that the current board is, lacks with the community is just
mind
blows
blowing.
me away. Yeah, it blows me away because, we want to engage them. I think somebody mentioned in the chat that I just want to uplift that, like, Measure J passed because their board worked with so many community groups. This is the result of years of research. We're doing all of this stuff now. We're letting them know. I mean, the same way Latino Health Access has let them know, hey, Santa Ana, Anaheim, these, the folks that live in this county don't have access to testing. They don't have access to the vaccine. So, it's unfortunate that it has to take other agencies to let the agency in charge of us with the, delegates the money and sets the priorities to let them know where we really need it. How do they not know that? How do they think that all of this money going to social control? I mean, our jails are half empty. Do we need to expand them? Absolutely not.
Hold on.
Yeah,
I'll get to that. I'll go.
Yep, next
but I just
slide.
want to say, like, here in this slide, you can see how the priorities of the community are in dark contrast to the priorities set by the Board of Supervisors. We want more investment in our community, in our mental health, in our community services. And they really insist on giving more and more money to Spitzer and Don Barnes. And as we will see now, it's very problematic. So next slide, please. The other issue here that I'd like to highlight in terms of responsiveness, that we have housing for is a human rights. We have the homeless task force. We have a lot of organizations that have been working with the county to sort of try to find some sustainable solution to the housing crisis here. And the response has been, again, it's falling on deaf ears. They give us lip service. They take a few projects from the state here and there, like patchwork, basically, but they're not really responding. They're not really seeing that we have a very, very serious housing crisis. Just an hour and a half ago, we had this webinar with HHRC white paper, and they went into detail on this very serious crisis, but our Board of Supervisors is out of the loop, like that. They're not engaging. And the way they're playing this is that there's a lot of interplay between power and money. They do have the power to end this. They do have the money to do it. They're not doing it. And that's very problematic. So the studies that from UCI showed that it costs around $50,000 to house a chronically homeless person. Millions of dollars have been spent, and we're, as we will see in the next slide, millions of dollars have already been spent. And you can go to the next slide. And we'll see that homelessness continues to grow. We're not getting anywhere near our situation. And that definitely has to do with competence. That definitely has to do with other factors. But one of the main factors is that they're detached from their communities. They're not responding. As a governing body, they're not responding to the community. Next slide. And also another example of how it's infuriating, how they're squandering millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars. Now they're embarking on expanding the music jail and turning it into a mental health jail. Mental health and jail are two terms that should never, ever be in one sentence. Like that's just wrong, like plain wrong, right? So to have that when we clearly don't have the need for that, and B, there's great opposition from the communities. There's a whole coalition, again, that meets on Monday. Monday night is the action night for a lot of the organizations. So TGOC and Stop the Music Coalition meets every other Monday to talk about how we're gonna stop this. Because not only it's just a waste of dollars, like our tax dollars that we desperately need right now, it's also affecting the lives of these people, our fellow friends and neighbors. So it's bad in so many ways. Any way you look at it, it's going to be bad. So the numbers that we're talking about here is like $250 million. That's like mind blowing when you know how many people have and how many organizations have talked to them. Next slide. And I'm powering through them because I know we're out of time. Next slide, please. So the other principle, or the next principle, is being effective and efficient. And I do want to highlight, and this is something that Karen just talked about. When we had Neil Kelly here, hosted by Women 4, he told us, if you all remember, how he was planning this ahead of time. He saw what was going on with USPS. He saw the polarization, and he expected and anticipated, because he's an efficient and effective elected public official, right? Clayton Chow is anything but. It's like the whole, not just him, like the whole agency, that right now when you look at it, and I know we shouldn't be generalizing, but it does reflect on the whole agency. They're in shambles. A simple, we didn't really need an app to tell people. A website could have done it. An app that cost $2 million, an app that cost $2 million and was a total fiasco, is anything but effective and efficient. Next slide. And yeah, so human rights and cultural diversity and social cohesion. I just want to show this slide that we borrowed from TGOC and ACLU. The next slide, please. OC jails. Just look at that. Look at this. I mean, we can go over this one, but I want you to look on the right side and see how Latinx and Black folks make up 63% of our jail population, although our population in OC of Black people is 9%. That just tells you something about what he understands over the county, and because it's not just Barnes, it's a whole culture. If Barnes was a bad person, the county has the power of purse. We'll see in a sec how many millions of dollars they gave him. They could have said, we don't want to give you this until you do that. They don't do that. Anything that Barnes asks for, he gets. Because there's this culture, patriarchal culture, and the idolization of law enforcement and disregard of minorities, because we have racism rooted in our county, unfortunately, and they're not far removed from that. Next slide.
Just real quick, also along with that, and you may be touching on the sound financial management piece, the sheriff put out weekly, sometimes daily press releases about all the work he wasn't going to be doing during COVID. Their front offices of the sheriff's department were closed. He wasn't enforcing a mask mandate, self-patrol, I mean, and yet they still got more money. They got more money for their salary so far. So just wanted to point that out real quick.
Thank you. And that actually I was going to talk about under the rule of law, following the rule of law, and how, yes, it's the elected official Barnes, but again, the county, the Board of Supervisors does have power, the power of purse. Again, if they wanted him to act a certain way, they wouldn't be giving him, they could say, we're not going to give you the money you're asking for. That's beside the budget that's already allocated for them, for the sheriff's department. They have the ability and the power to say, we're not going to do this until you take action on this, for instance, right? When the court ruled on December 11th that Barnes should release or reduce the jail population because he wasn't doing anything to control COVID and by 50%, he's still not doing it. He spent a lot of time back and forth, wasted everybody's time, the city councils, etc., to support his frivolous, not frivolous, but like his lawsuit, which we all knew he's still gonna be held liable, and he was just called it, I think, 10 days ago. So next slide. We were talking about sound financial, so the next one, yeah, these are the examples of the lack of sound. So speaking of sound financial management, we have a $260 million expansion. That was initially 100, I think, and what's the number? $167 million, which that I want to know how and why, etc. But again, transparency is not something that they deal with the board of supervisors. But even if I take that at its face value, when you estimate $167 million for a project and you end up now the estimate and some of the expenses are coming up to $260 million, that shows how lousy you are in managing finances. Next slide, please. And again, this is a reminder where the money is coming from. This is part of it's coming from the state, but the majority, I mean, even if it's coming through the state, it's still your money, but also there's some money that's coming directly from us to them. Next slide, sorry. This is the fun part. I wish I could make it bigger, but we're talking about sound financial management. When we were researching for this presentation, we've been trying for a while to find out how much these people are paid. And it's not easy. It's really not easy. So this information is from Cal Salary. So, and I verified some of it, but it's really, really very hard because you have to have a scheme table and it's complicated for someone who's not initiated as I am. But we found that Ted Spitzer gets around $405,000 a year. That's almost $500,000. But that's not the problem. I mean, that is an exorbitant amount of money. My problem is if you look here in the highlighted in orange, that's 60% higher than the average district attorney in California. I'm not talking about Alabama. 60% more. And 257% more than the average salary in Orange County. Barnes is around the same numbers, basically. If we can go to the next slide. The supervisors, and I only listed 3 here because I was in a hurry. I'm sorry, but not to. Chafee is the same, is on par with Lisa Bartlett and Andrew Doe, with their base salary being $168,000, and they're all making around $254,000, $256,000 a year, right? So when the reason we're very annoyed about that is that you look at it and it's like 44% higher than their peers elsewhere in the state. Wagner, for some reason, we're talking about 9%. I don't really understand why. And again, that brings us to the other concept, which is transparency. It's very hard to find information. Nick Gerda has to keep sending these PRIs one after the other and wait for months to get the information. So I just wanted to point these out. Oh, and also one last thing. I don't think it's in the slides. I don't think I included it. Frank Kim gets around $400,000 a year. His wife, who I think he hired, we have to verify, but she was hired right after he was hired, gets around $260,000 or $250,000 a year.
He's the county CEO.
Yeah,
so he manages the budget. He's in charge of that. But
he can hire people. He has a lot of, and that's a good point, because the board of supervisors is not just those 4 or 5 supervisors. It's also the legal counsel. It's also the board, the CEO. It's a lot of other people, but the CEO is really one of the more important people in the board of supervisors, and he has a lot of powers to hire and fire and contract, like contract people or conclude contracts in secret, without any public bidding. So anyway, so that's, I know that we're running out of time. We'll start as ethical conduct. This is, I think, one of the questions, what about this? these are the numbers, and I'm not going to read them because you can see them. The Police Association donated to campaigns, especially to Doe. And then here you can see how after they made these donations to their campaigns, Doe turned around and supported a salary increase, basically. A 65 million additional dollars in addition to the discretionary funding for the Sheriff's Department, mainly for salaries. Next. So there was also a couple of things that I just want to talk about. Competence. Okay, now I think if you we'll answer them if you have any questions. But here is what we're trying. This is the call to action of our presentation today, and we will send you links to the other ones that they will go out to you by email. So March 9th, we have already, as Felicity said, ballots have already dropped. It's special elections for the second supervisorial. That's the seat of Michelle Steele. It's coming up on the 9th. So if you're in that district, or if you know friends or family, please make sure that they vote. It's really, really important there because as we saw here very briefly, these people have a lot of power over our daily life. Next. And this is the one that I'm going to send you the link to, is that we really urge people now to sort of call and email and tweet at and whatever you want to your supervisors, and just ask them to have the decency to provide teleconferencing for their public comments. We don't have to risk our lives and our well-being just to go and give public comment. And then again, that brings us back to the point that I brought up at the beginning, when they said they really, really would like to limit your participation as much as possible. So our first priority right now is to make sure that we have that access, because they've allowed these mobs to come and make this place very, very unsafe for us. So that's a priority for us. And I will send you the link to it. And there's one more thing that we'll also send you the link to, and then I'll shut up. One last slide. So that demand that they cancel the expansion contract. They've already started it. Some of the money has already been spent, but that doesn't mean that we can't save and salvage. Not just for the money, to be honest. It's just think of who will be in that jail and what will that do to them. So yes, money is a big factor here, but it's not the most important factor. So one way to do that is to send emails to the Board of Supervisors, asking them to cancel, but also we should look at the city of Irvine, even if you're not in the city of Irvine, because that affects the whole county, and say, hey, are you okay with this? I don't think you should be building this. And instead, how about there's, I think, Be Well, that's the program now for mental health. How about these funds be allocated to that so we can get more people? And I will send you the links to both letters for you to take action in your email. I hope that I covered as much as I could and didn't go over too much. So yeah, now is for the questions.
Okay. I have been keeping track of the questions. I'm not sure how good a job I've done. I have great respect for Felicity. She usually does it. And I don't know how she does. There was a question about how the districts were established. And Jane made a comment asking, to explain why a county island in the central west part of the county is included in South County. Yeah. So basically, how did they figure this out? By population, by city, by what?
Again, I'll just reiterate the disclaimer that Karen said at the beginning. We're coming here from a perspective of community organizing. So we're not really in the know of how, I don't know how they chose this island to be part of South County. All I know is that when they allocate or when they define the districts, they have to be of equally rough population. So I'm sorry that I don't have an answer for you on why that happened, because it's a little bit outside of my purview. I don't know, Karen, if you have any answer to this.
I don't know the exact answer, but I was looking at the California State Association of Counties last night. And there is some information on there. So I'm just going to look for the appropriate link and put it in the chat. So if you want to just run to the next question.
Okay. Pat asked, what consequence, if any, are there if a local school board attempts to shortcut or bypass school safety measures that the state has passed?
So again, this is part of the accountability for the Board of Supervisors, in general, right? Is that the decision lies with them, right? The decision lies with the OC Board of Education, who, when it came to opening the schools, decided that, oh, I don't want to be responsible. I'll leave it to each district to decide on their own. So they abandoned their responsibility, in my opinion, here. And the board is not really, the Board of Supervisors is not doing anything.
So there's no cross responsibility or accountability between?
I mean, do they have the power to change things? I think they do. But is there anything that we can do? That's a very good question, because although it doesn't really answer your question, and I apologize for that, because they're really not responsive, So, but for the accountability, or I think there was another question, what's the oversight that I took notice of?
Yes.
Yeah. So the oversight, there isn't really, we have the OIR, but again, it's less than 1 year young so far. And we still have to see how that's gonna work, because they hire them and they fire them. So that's not exactly the independence that you were looking for. But again, Sergio Perez is very promising, and we're looking forward to that. There's elections, but that happens only every 2 years. Recalls is an option for people if things get dire with the Board of Supervisors. And I've heard some people are also considering that now for Doe and Wagner. And you can always go to court and file lawsuits like the Homeless Task Force did, so they can get the right to address, because the rule was, I think, I don't know if it was Michelle C or someone else who said you can't address this specific supervisor when you give public comments. You have to be addressing the whole board. So the Homeless People's Task Force went to court, and they won on that, saying that we can address a supervisor. So that's one way of doing it. And public comment. And public comment is very important. I know that I said we had thousands of public comments that went unanswered, but when you're so skilled and experienced as Karen Hernandez is, you know how to push the buttons. And I think this is really important, and you can talk about it, Karen, but I just want to highlight how her persistence and asking questions and showing up really helped with getting the attention of Nick Gerda, who followed up on these secret contracts with the health department, and as many of you saw at the Voice of OC, there was excellent reporting on how they're mismanaging the CARES Act funds. So yes, it's tedious, it doesn't always work, but it is very important. It's like your letters to the editor. That's what I have to say, Karen.
Yes, definitely. I mean, addressing the Board of Supervisors takes several steps, right? You have to look at the agenda, see when they're meeting, take a look at where you can, depending on what action they're taking, what policy they're setting, what money they're allocating to whatever department, you can choose to comment on that specific agenda item, or you can also just choose to give a general comment. So the mid-year budget report was on the agenda a few weeks ago, and I read it, and he pointed out in the executive summary, we're giving more money to the sheriff and not as much money, for salaries than to public health. And it's like, in the middle of a pandemic, I was so outraged that, I decided to write a public comment about it and just call it out. And, the thing also about, I think, a lot of politicians and generally people in power is they have very thin skin. you never realize how easy you can get to them. Like any little thing will set them off. Andrew Doe is a really great example of that. It was my first time actually getting under his skin, but I did, to the point that he stopped. They were reading my comment, county council was, because I was not there in person. He stopped and turned to the CEO and said, I need you to address this. You need to tell them we're not mismanaging the money. Tell them what we're doing. And then he said, oh, secret contracts. This information had never been publicly disclosed before. And, thankfully, people like Nick Gerda and the Voice of OC are, trying to get all of this public information through the Public Records Act. But in theory, the information should be there for us. Why do we have to request it? It takes so long for them to respond to that, to the point that at the last meeting, again, Andrew Doe pointed out that, we have we get 2 of these a day. This is not even part of our regular job. You have no idea. This is so hard. Complained about doing his job.
Didn't he call the Voice of OC the noise of OC?
He did. He said we're noisemakers, and he doesn't want to hear from us. He doesn't think that, he's trying to make himself look good because he got caught doing something. He's not being transparent. He's not being inclusionary. And everybody, there's a lot of folks that are home right now paying attention, a lot of folks who've lost their jobs, a lot of folks who rely on the county money to survive. And they're not surviving in a very great way right now. Everybody's struggling. I'm being very polite because normally.
Yes, you are. You've been complimented in the chat as well.
Thank you.
And I will tell you, I'll make a shameless plug that next month we're having Noberto from Voice of OC. He'll be talking to us about media literacy and how to figure out what you're hearing and how to analyze it and how to appraise it. So
I have to say, Woman 4 puts up the coolest webinars.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I know that people have answered this. Yes, Felicity.
Carol, I just wanted to respond to one of the things in the chats. Somebody mentioned that Mayor Khan has said that there's no changing the music jail. That is not the case. I have spoken with her and with other members of the city council, and they feel that there has not been any public comment on the music jail. If there were public comment, then they would be able to put it on the agenda as an issue and actually discuss it in a public forum. And maybe we could even get an actual town hall on this issue that would increase the exposure, because so many people, I know from the time that I was working at music when they had ICE detainees there, Irvine residents were not even aware that there was a jail in Irvine. It's so far out on the border that many people have no idea what it is. They think it might be a warehouse, apart from the fact that it's all fenced so you can't see inside. I think that we as Irvine residents and the rest of the county members, we really need to start writing letters to the Irvine City Council and the Board of Supervisors and say, we do not want our tax dollars built on a total albatross. I mean, because as we saw in this presentation, the jail population is currently at half of the capacity. Why in the world would we need another 1,000 beds if we haven't filled half of what we have, which is, I mean, it's good that we haven't filled it, but I mean, there's absolutely no reason. You know that there's some ulterior motive for those 1,000 beds, and who is going to fill them? This is just such a boondoggle, and we need to stop it in any way we can. Okay, I'm done.
Felicity,
Yes.
Felicity, if what you're saying is, and I know what you're saying is true, do we have a link that's documentation of like that half the beds have not even been used, these kinds of things, so that if we write as a group, like from the advocates or whatever, we write a letter that can be signed on by a number of people, that we also have a link we can put into a couple of things.
Stop the Music Coalition.
Yeah, there is. And I think it's in the chat.
The town hall.
There have also been some very good, Sarah Kahn, who's a UCI law student or recent graduate, I'm not sure if she's finished yet, wrote a wonderful article in the Voice of OC, which I will try and find and put the link in here, precisely about the money that's being used for, that goes into greater detail about the money that's being used. So that should be somewhat helpful.
Okay.
And I think there was a question regarding the average daily population of what is the reason for the ADP, so many of them being unsentenced. Do you guys know
Oh,
that?
yeah, it's because they can't afford bail. They're poor.
But they're not
No.
sentenced.
Yeah, they're not waiting
sentenced,
trial.
They're being, so it's, they're technically, you know, innocent until proven guilty, but not in Barnes jails. In Barnes jails, you are guilty. And he, you know, he led this huge campaign. I'm sure you guys all saw it all over the media as well, that, you know, this judge wants me to let all these criminals out. And that's not what they
Fear-mongering.
were saying. He was saying we need to move them around, right? That they needed to, I mean, and over 60% of them were for misdemeanors and they were still awaiting trial. So a misdemeanor could be, it could be the criminalization of homelessness. Like if you got a ticket or too many tickets for sleeping in a park, it could be, you know what I mean? It's any number of things that are just not worth, you know, being in jail for, having COVID outbreaks that are there. It's unconscionable. It's just unfortunate.
I know.
If I may just add very quickly to this, I think all of us, or most of us, remember how, like, just before Christmas, it was just 2 days before Christmas, that Don Barnes decided this is the most urgent thing that needs to be done right away. And he got all these city councils to meet, have special meetings, and discuss joining the amicus brief or sending a letter in support, without really giving them the chance. Like I know in Aliso Viejo, it was overnight. On Friday evening, they were told the city manager decided to have the meeting on Monday. This is, again, the weekend before Christmas. So no one really had the chance to look into it in detail, get some public feedback, etc. And that brings us back to the whole culture of poor governance that the county has.
Right.
That no communication, no transparency. They think that they can run this the way they want.
Felicity mentioned the amount of money, and you also listed it, how much money they make and how much money they are giving to the supervisor races.
The association, they're not giving personally. The associate, the police union, etc. is giving money to.
How can we stop that? I mean, it seems so wrong. They are making so much money, and they are using our money to fund
more money.
Yeah. I mean, what can we do to stop that?
I mean, I think one of the things is find some alternative good candidates and have some people power to support them. I mean, that's one of the problems. If, you know,
we don't have a good bench.
Yeah.
That's what it's not just one solution. It's a multi-tiered sort of approach, if you will. So part of it is working on getting a good bench of candidates, right? And part of it is making public comments. Part of it is also seriously considering recall. I know a group here who's really considering recall based on these secret contracts. Some people want including myself, want Frank Kim, the CEO, fired for the corruption, the level of corruption, at least that seems to be like transpiring from this. So there isn't a specific way. You have to multiply rallies when COVID is over is one way of doing it, and supporting Voice of OC and getting them to cover this more is one way of it. We don't have a sort of a magic pill for this. I don't think so.
It's going to take time. This is Armida Brashears. We can do what Stacey Abrams did in Georgia. We can work on grooming new candidates like Katrina Foley. We can all get behind one candidate on the next election cycle and get more women on the board, get some of our women out there. It can be done. We just have to concentrate because they've got a lot of money that they can play loose and free with. as long as they don't let us as citizens have our say.
And I'll just add, I agree with you. I will also add that it's not just this, because even our best candidates, like our best representatives sometimes, can lose sight of our needs if we're not there. I mean, that's the hard lesson of the Trump era, if you will, if we're not there engaged, actively engaged. And again, we have the People's Budget OC, we have Housing is a Human Rights OC, we have the OC Emergency Response. We have a lot of organizations that are engaging and are following very, very closely. And I think just supporting this or keeping track of what they're doing or involving at any level is very important, because even if we have like 3 supervisors who are on our side, they might lose sight if we're not there to remind them gently, but
Right.
to remind them that these are our needs.
I think it's also important to point out that there are manners of making your comments known to the Board of Supervisors and having them read aloud. This is something that we have determined that because of the
Pandemic.
no, not because of that. Well, yes, because of the pandemic, but because of the Disabilities Act, we
Oh,
have
right.
a right to have our voices heard, even when we can't be there physically in person. Many of us who would like to go there feel that because of the atmosphere, since there's no social distancing enforced, no one is being forced to wear masks there. And because so many of these people, mostly from South County, who don't believe that COVID even exists, do not wear masks and do not do any social distancing. So we have appealed to the county council, Leon Page, he's the county's attorney, and said that because of our health condition, it can be because of your age, because of your doctor's orders, that we are not able to come to the Board of Supervisors meetings in person, but we would like to have our comments read aloud. And he has been reading our comments aloud for the past 6 months. And that is the way.
Felicity, could you share that information with all of us so that we can each do that, so we know the protocols?
Yes, actually on the People's Budget OC page, there
can
will
grab the
be,
link.
right? Oh,
Yep.
good.
I'll grab it.
Karen's
Okay.
gonna put
thank
the
you.
link in there.
Yeah.
We'll explain how to do that. You have to have a legitimate reason for not being able to show up in person. You can comment on up to 3 items. You can look at the agenda beforehand and see what the Board of Supervisors agenda and the supplemental agenda, because they always have 2 agendas. So you have to check both of them. You can have a comment in public comment, which doesn't have to be about a specific agenda item, but your other 2 comments have to be in response to an agenda item. So you have
Yeah.
to make that known.
I just want to make the point here that while this is an okay temporary solution, it's really not ideal. At this point, we really, really, really need teleconferencing. It's like they can't get some webinar or like going on, or like
Yeah.
I can't
mean,
like with all these millions of dollars that they're
right.
basically
They
squandering.
have the financial capacity to
They
do
do.
it.
They do.
have the
It's- and it's
technological
not that
capacity to do
If
it.
cities can do it, then they can definitely do it, right?
And they have
Yeah.
already
But
Well, if
because
if LA County can do it.
Right. They have sign language, they have an interpreter,
Yeah, exactly.
and they, the Board of Supervisors only transmits in English. That's it. You don't even
because
get.
I also wanted to just say one thing, because they get like almost like these ridiculously high salaries, and then we see them as public. We see them twice a month, right, for public comments. And instead of having the courtesy of having us just give our comments and leave, they let us stay until the end of the day. They do whatever they want to do. And if they see that there is more than 50 of us, they cut down our time from 3 minutes to 1
right.
minute. So when I'm sending it to Leon Page, and I'm sending it on the basis that it's 3 minutes, right? But then if it's cut to 1 minute, he's going to read the first part. But if I were there, if I were on teleconferencing, I would be the one able to decide which issue I need to prioritize, which point I need to prioritize. So my right to freedom of expression, my right to public participation in meetings is really undermined. So yes, it's very helpful that we have Leon Page, although that's not his job. That's not what we pay him that much money. it would be much more cost efficient if they just get the teleconferencing going.
And they do have that technology because in other county government agencies, for example, the Orange County Human Relations Commission, they use live teleconferencing. So they have the technology, they have the ability to do it. They just don't have the political will because they don't really want to hear our comments.
They don't want
That's the
participation.
bottom line, yeah.
Yeah.
How do you
I'm
state
sorry, go ahead.
a reason for not being able to join due to safety? What is the terminology?
Well,
So I put it in the link. There's a
It's in
people's
the- yeah.
budget, yeah, on how to contact the board. There's some sample language there.
And
You don't
just
necessarily,
copy it. Just
yeah,
copy
just
it.
copy it. You don't necessarily have to reference that you have, your health history or anything like that, but you should reference it's because, it's
Of a
not
health
safe to be
condition.
there. Yeah.
You don't
health
have to
condition.
say what the issue
Yeah.
is, just
Right.
say you
Under
have a health
HIPAA,
issue.
you have the right not to mention anything.
Right.
But just
Right.
safety
Right.
concerns. Okay.
And just
Yeah.
mention the doctor's orders or because of your age
Yeah.
or underlying health conditions, anything.
Underlying health conditions, yes.
There you go. Yeah.
You
And I
know,
just want to uplift something really quick that Armida, I actually keep a Stacey Abrams quote on my desk that I look at every single day. And maybe
Yeah.
this is a nice thing to close with, but it keeps me going, honestly, because there are days that this work is hard. We get a lot of bad news, more
Yeah.
than good news, but I see what Stacey did and it just inspires me. And there's so many, sorry, that's my bird. I have a parrot. And it's just one of those things. So I just would like to read it very quickly. Remember this in the darkest moments, when the work doesn't seem worth it and change seems just out of reach. Out of our willingness to push through comes a tremendous power. Use it.
Thank you.
100%.
Power to the people, especially to the
Yeah.
women.
Before we leave, there was a question that they wanted to, Virginia wanted to know if we'd have access to the PowerPoint. It was actually very well done. And I know you said you did it the last minute, but it was great.
Well, thank you so much. Maybe we can clean it up and
And we could post it on our website. We'd be, okay, thank you. That would be
I
great.
did start recording this, but unfortunately not at the beginning. I hadn't realized it wasn't being recorded.
Oh, I thought it was, okay.
I think we missed the first just few minutes. So we'll try
Okay.
and see if we can get that.
And that will also be posted on our website, women4oc.org, right?
that's cool.
And I really appreciate all of you hanging in there with us. This was absolutely fabulous, Karen and Lulu.
Thank you for
Yes,
having
thank
us.
you,
Thanks a
Karen
lot.
and Lulu. You did great.
Thank you.